Hello and welcome to the Wildcard Rewind. Week 6 is in the books. The boys have abandoned me, so I'm here on my own. So sisters are doing it for themselves.
I just wanna rewind to when we were young at heart. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
Yes, another week in the books, week 6 down. It's been a really fun week of football. Really enjoyed it. Some blowouts, some close games, lots to dig into. Really good showings from some rookie QBs. As you can hear this week, I am flying solo. The boys have abandoned me. They've made their excuses. But hey, we'll move on. We'll get on with the day. It will be a little bit of a shorter show this week because obviously they're not slowing me down. I'm giving you all the best info, short and sharp, as I say, unlike them butting in and too busy chatting. So let's get on with the big news of the week. Obviously, bye weeks continue. It's actually not as bad this week. There's only 2 teams on bye. That's the Bears and the Cowboys. Certainly the Cowboys look like they need a bit of time off here. They had quite a shocker of a week. I was very disappointed because I played Dak and CD in a number of different leagues, and unfortunately they did let me down. So I'm hoping they're going to get a chance to regroup and maybe come back a little bit stronger in week 8. Obviously, the Bears had a great showing in London, really fun game. I hope anybody who got to go had a great time. Things are looking a little bit kind of on thin ice now for the Jags and Doug Peterson. I think if he has another loss this week, I think there's a chance that he may be out of a job. And obviously, talking of out of a job, obviously the Jets fired their head coach, Robert Saleh, after last week's game in London. So let's see if we can get a 2 for 2 of coaches being fired from London games. So interesting. The Jets will play tonight, so it'll be interesting to see how things go with the interim head coach there. Obviously, the main news this week, we're going to be through injuries. So they really are starting to rack up now, which makes things difficult along with bye weeks. So first up, Travis Etienne, week to week with a hamstring injury. I do think he was struggling a little bit. I wonder, he has had a shoulder injury. I think that may have been setting him back a little bit. I know he hasn't always been kind of the most efficient running back, but he was getting there with workload. Now that Tank Bigsby has been coming along, we've not been seeing that so much. And as I say, I do think he's had some nagging injuries that have meant that Tank's got more involved. Obviously now Etienne's going to be out for a few weeks, it seems like. So Tank Bigsby is the next guy up. Now, it seems to me that he's getting the majority of the running back work, the rushing work, but they are getting Dearness Johnson involved in some of the passing work. So I don't think it's going to be a total workhorse role for him, but I do think he's certainly going to have some value. Obviously, we saw last week he had a pretty good game, so we know that he can put up fantasy points for us. At this point, Tank Bigsby shouldn't be on any waiver wires. Certainly, I think the only leagues that you may find him on are these short bench leagues, but I think most likely he will already be on people's benches. But I would have a quick eye scan there and see if you can find him. Obviously, the Jags are in a little bit of a mess, so they're not probably going to be putting up loads and loads of points each week. But I do still think he's going to have some fantasy value, certainly to help get us through bye weeks and some of the other injuries that we've been having. So I think he is a good pickup on waivers if he's still there this week. Obviously, from that Thursday night game, Jordan Mason had an AC sprain of his shoulder. We don't actually know the exact severity of it, and we don't know if it's going to keep him out for any length of time, but it is possible that we do see him miss. Obviously, that means that Isaac Guerrero, the rookie that they picked up this year, would be looking at getting a bigger role, that running back 1 role, and we know how valuable the San Francisco running back 1 role is. So again, I would be having a look at waivers and looking at picking up Isaac Guerrero just in the off chance that Jordan Mason does have to miss or he can't have a full complement of work. We saw Guerrero get that long run on Thursday night, so we know he can be explosive. And as I say, we know how valuable that running back 1 role is in San Francisco. doesn't look like Christian McCaffrey is coming back just yet. So if I have space on my bench and I have someone I can drop, I'm certainly picking up Isaac Guerrero in the chance that Mason misses. Obviously, if he doesn't, then you can pop him back on waivers again. But I would certainly be picking him up just in case. Couple of top wide receivers in the concussion protocol. So Marvin Harrison Jr. unfortunately didn't get much playing time this week before he had to leave with a concussion, and same with Chris Olave. Olave plays on Thursday Night Football this week, so I think it's highly unlikely that he'll be out of concussion protocol at that time. So Bub Means and Juwan Johnson may be guys that benefit there and might get a few more targets. However, they are playing the Broncos. Now, we do know that Pat Satan is in concussion protocol, so it might not be as much of a terrible matchup, but still that Broncos defense is pretty formidable. So I wouldn't be starting either of those guys unless I'm desperate. Obviously, Rashid Shaheed is a guy that we start every week anyway now at this point, although he can still have up and down games because he's that deep threat for those explosive plays. Jerome Ford, running back for the Cleveland Browns. Unfortunately, he also has a hamstring injury and had to leave early last week. Seems highly likely that Chubb is going to be back playing very soon, if not this week, probably in week 8. In the meantime, if he's not on the field in week 7, the carries will likely be split between Pierre Strong and Donta Foreman, as we saw for the remainder of the game this week. From a fantasy point of view, I have very little interest in those guys. Unfortunately, the Cleveland offense can't seem to get anything going. They're not really putting up anything particularly valuable. And if they're splitting time, again, I just don't think they're going to have much fantasy value to them. If you're in a really, really, really deep league, then you might consider popping someone on your bench. But again, even then, I'm not wholly excited about that. Dallas Goedert, the tight end of the Eagles, unfortunately, he has a hamstring injury. The Eagles have been struggling a little bit, but they did get that win over the Browns this week. I think most likely that just concentrates the targets more to A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, so that will benefit those guys more. I don't really think we're going to see any of the peripheral players really getting any major bump, particularly from a fantasy point of view. And the other guy that I just want to mention is Tajay Spears. Fortunately, he also has a hamstring injury. We're getting a lot of soft tissue injuries at the minute. And it just seems more likely that Pollard will basically become the workhorse in this offense. Again, this offense has been struggling a little bit, but Pollard seems to be doing really well with his work. So hopefully he will see an uptick in his fantasy points that he's putting up. And I think he's going to be a must start while Tajay Spears is out. So what did we learn this week? Obviously, the boys are not here and they didn't give me any learning points, typical. So I'm going to stick with what I learned. And, you know, off that massive big news of all the injuries, really, it's that you can never predict injuries. They are frustrating. Obviously, you really feel for the players. You know, someone like Aiden Hutchinson, really upsetting that he had that fractured tibia this week. He's going to be out for the foreseeable future. I know it's not fantasy relevant, but you just really feel for these players that particularly, you know, playing so well or playing for their jobs and they're getting injured. And, it must be really, really tough for them. Really, us being frustrated about our fantasy lineups is nothing compared to those guys. So I always feel for guys that have injuries, keeping them out of playing. But from a fantasy point of view, they can be really frustrating for us too, but they're wholly unpredictable. You know, if we knew that Chris Olave was going to go out or Marvin Harrison Jr. with a concussion in the beginning of the game, we wouldn't put them in or played them. But we never know. So they are unpredictable and you can never prepare for them. So I don't think you should ever feel mad that you played those guys, because again, like we say every week, it's all about process. If the process is right, then you cannot bemoan the results. And the process was right. You, of course, were going to start Chris Olave unless you had, loads of amazing wide receivers on your team. It's just really unfortunate that he had to leave early with injury. But despite that, I also think it's important to note, like, we're getting into that time of the year, as we can see, where we're getting lots of injuries. So it's really important to keep scouring the waiver wire. You know, at the minute you might be looking and saying, this looks really barren. There's absolutely no one that's going to give me any fancy value at the moment. But the point is, we shouldn't be looking just for fancy value at the moment. We need to be looking at potential fancy value in the future. So this is the time we want to start putting those particularly running back handcuffs onto our benches. At the minute, these guys are going to be free or pennies. Nobody's looking at them. You know, we're thinking things like Ray Davies, you know, these rookies, Ray Davies, you know, the guy from the Rams, I can't remember his name, the rookie there. You know, these guys that we know are handcuffs at the minute, not giving us any value, but if the starter goes down, they're going to get a big role. So they go from a 0 to a hero on your bench. Now, if that guy sat on your bench and you've already got him, you're not going to have to spend half of your fab trying to acquire him and competing with everyone else. He's sat there, you can plug him into your lineup, you haven't paid any fab for it, and you haven't missed out on getting him. Now, you also have to be aware that this means you need to have regular roster turnover at the bottom of your bench. This can be hard in these really short bench leagues, but I do think it's always valuable to have one spot that you feel that you can kind of rotate guys in and out. You know, if you think, oh, this handcuff is really useful to have, pop him on your bench, have him for a few weeks. If you think, seems unlikely, or there's another guy that you think, oh, this one's going to be useful, then you can rotate through. But as I say, having those handcuffs already there on your bench, really, really important. So I think having a look through the waiver wire, not just looking for next week, but looking for the future. Who's not giving me value at the moment, but should something happen to the person in front of them, is going to give me great value, suddenly become a running back 2, running back 1. These are the guys I want to have on my bench to know that they're going to give me great value if anything happens. Sometimes you'll stash that guy the whole year and the running back in front of them doesn't get injured and they do nothing for you. But sometimes you roster them and within a few weeks they're doing something for you. Tank Bigsby, great example. Very little value start the season. Obviously Etienne gets injured, so he starts playing a little bit less. And then now, unfortunately, Etienne is going to be out. And obviously, Tank Bigsby is going to take over that running back 1 role. So really great example there. And there will be other guys there on your waivers, particularly in these shorter bench leagues, that you should be keeping an eye on and trying to stash just in case their starter goes down. So let's move on to our regular features. Stud, Scare, and Wildcard. You guys should already know what's going on, but anybody who might be new, we'll go through it again. So we talk about the fantasy stud of the week. This is the guy where we talk about an under the radar player. So that might be someone who's on waivers or someone who we haven't really been talking about as a stud that we think is going to smash this coming week. Then we've got the scares. This is where we talk about a hyped up player, your kind of studs, as it were, that we think could disappoint next week. And then obviously we talk about our wild cards. So something that we think could happen in the week to come. Usually we like to go for something less likely, the better. So just a bit of fun. However, to make things a little bit more interesting, we've started a competition. So obviously we're in week 6 now. I think at the minute we're all pretty much drawing. So each week, the loser of the week will score a point. So it's a bit like golf. The higher points, the worse things are. And the forfeit's going to be at the end of the season. The loser has to open the first show after the Super Bowl with a monologue that the other 2 hosts have chosen. So I'm hoping not to lose. And the great news is, because the guys are off this week, I get to dish out the points. So it looks like the other 2 guys might be getting quite a few points this week. But let's have a look. So let's have a look at last week's studs. So Lewis said Mark Andrews was going to be his stud. He did pretty well this week. Obviously, he scored a touchdown. He had 15.6 PPR points and finished as the Titan 6. Now, historically, we would have been disappointed with that, but based on what's happened with him this season, it's actually a pretty good finish for him. So not too bad there, Lewis. Paul, unfortunately, went back to the well with Dontavian Wicks, as I did last week. Unfortunately, Wicks got injured quite early on and he only scored 1.9 PPR points, finishing as the wide receiver 89. I actually thought that maybe I might lose this week because I said Darnell Mooney and he only scored 6.8 PPR points. But thankfully, he finished higher than Dontavian Wicks as wide receiver 49. So it looks like I don't even need to argue my case here. We can both or all see who the loser is for the stud this week. Unfortunately, that's Paul. So, Paul, 1 point to you. Unfortunately, no stud for Wicks, and it seems like he might be out for a few weeks now. So that seems a massive shame, particularly because he was a big waiver wire ad a couple of weeks ago. He's not just really come through for us, which is unfortunate because I do think he's very talented, but he can't seem to get on top of those drops. So I think he's going to be out for a few weeks now, and I'm not totally convinced of his fancy value moving forward. So if you've got space, I would hold him, but if not, I personally would consider dropping him. So let's look at our studs for this week. So although the boys abandoned me, they did actually leave me their studs. So I'm going to start with Lewis. He's going to go with Jalen Polk. So this is actually an interesting one because it links a little bit to mine. And Lewis did say the guy that I had chosen. He said that first, but I said, no, sorry, I've taken it. And obviously, because you're not here, Lewis, you haven't got a choice in who you're taking. So I chose Demario Douglas, Pop Douglas. So he seems to be the favourite target for rookie Drake May, who obviously started this week. May really started to come on in the second half and look like he is going to be quite a fun QB to watch. Obviously, the Patriots still have lots of issues, but he seemed to really be keen on targeting Demario Douglas. So for me, that's why I've chosen him. Obviously, they're playing the Jags. The Jags defense are also giving up the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So for me, I think Demario Douglas is going to finish the highest of the Pats receivers. Now, as I say, I think ultimately Lewis probably agrees with me, but because he couldn't pick Pop Douglas, he's gone for Jalen Polk. So both of them could actually give us reasonable points based on obviously playing the Jags D, who is giving up to wide receivers. So that will be fun to see if they both manage to show out, and also if not, who's going to put up the most fantasy points. So a little mini kind of bet between me and Lewis within the normal structure. Paul has said Xavier Legette. I think that's quite a fun one. Good choice. He did have a touchdown this week and seemed to be getting quite involved in the offense. I think the slight challenge we have is that obviously Carolina is struggling as a team, although they seem to be doing not too bad with Andy Dalton at the helm. So we'll be interesting to see how they get on this week. So let's have a look at our scares of the week. Last week, Lewis nailed it. He said Brandon Ayuk. He scored 5.7 PPR points, finishing as the wide receiver 58. On the whole, Ayuk has been disappointing this season from a fantasy point of view. Obviously, he had one great week last week in week 5. Really felt like he was back, but unfortunately, he gave a bit of a dud again this week. He was being drafted in kind of mid round 2. Really feels like a bit of a overpay. I think we get really excited about this San Francisco offense, which is, absolutely rightly so. It is a very efficient, high-powered offense, but there's just so many elite mouths to feed that someone is always going to miss out. And it seems at the moment that the majority of the time that's Brandon Ayuk. And it's really interesting that George Kittle is quietly having a great season, and actually he's probably the best value of the elite tight ends so far this season, which is really interesting because he has historically been very boom bust, but he is putting up quite a good number of points a lot of weeks. So that's an interesting one there. Paul said Bucky Irving. Obviously, Rashad White was out. He had a few more opportunities. He scored with 18.5 PPR points. He finished as a running back 11. Unfortunately, I didn't do the best with my scares this week because I said Baker Mayfield. Turns out that the Bucs scored 51 points on the Saints, whose defense decided to play like absolute trash, which is very upsetting because I was hoping that they would actually pin their ears back and stop Baker Mayfield. He scored 25.9 PPR points and finished as the overall QB2. Now, I could be mean. I could say, I've not lost him, not going to give myself a point. But, look, I'm going to be honest and I'm going to give myself the point here for the scare. I can't really get away with it, can I? QB2, that's pretty horrendous, to be honest. So I know the guys would be laughing at me if they were here. So I'm going to have to take one from the team and take the point. So let's have a look at what we've got for this week's scare. So this week, Lewis has gone for Chris Godwin. That's pretty brave, saying that he so far is finished as the overall wide receiver 1 this week, and he's been doing absolutely awesome throughout the whole of the season. Currently, he is sitting at wide receiver number 1 overall. However, now I think Lewis is going to regret saying this because the Bucks play on Monday Night Football. So although Lewis might be right with Chris Godwin struggling against the Ravens, unfortunately, Lewis is probably going to have to forfeit and take the point here because Chris Godwin plays on Monday Night Football. So I'm just prepping Lewis that he might get a point next week already because unfortunately he forgot to read the rules again. To be fair to him, he is poorly this week, so that could be in his chest infection fog. So we may let him off if he listens to this week's show and lets me know who he would like as an alternative. Then I will consider putting that player in. If he doesn't listen, sorry, Lewis, you've forfeited again. But again, if he listens and decides to pay attention, then I might just let him pick a different player. So Paul has said Drake London. So the Vikings what am I doing? The Falcons this week play the Seahawks. That should be quite a fun matchup. Could be an up and down game, but London's been doing really well. Seems to be connecting quite nicely now with Kirk Cousins. So be interesting to see. Yeah, interesting to see how things go there. So I've actually gone for this week the 49ers running back 1. Now, we actually, like I said in the big news, we don't know if Mason's going to be playing, so I haven't specified the player specifically because it could be Garendo, it could be Mason, it could be a combination of both. So they play Kansas City on Sunday. That Kansas City defense are giving up the fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. And I think it's highly likely this game is going to be a shootout. I think this is going to be good fun. I suspect that Kansas City is going to pip San Francisco because I just think that San Francisco defense has been struggling a little bit this season. I think it's going to be a shootout. I think there's going to be fewer yards to be had on the ground generally, and I think they're going to run it less because they're going to be trying to keep up with Kansas City. So I'm going to say the 49ers running back 1. So let's have a look at our wild card of the week. So last week, our wild cards were Lewis said that Drake May wins in his first start. Unfortunately, he didn't, despite putting up a really valiant effort. They did lose to the Texans, who seemed to dominate them in the game. He also said that Jaden Reed and Marvin Harrison Jr. both finished as top 10 wide receivers. As we said before, Marvin Harrison Jr. unfortunately didn't score any fantasy points before leaving in a concussion, and Reed finished this week as wide receiver 23. So that was not really close on either of those. So sorry, Paul, both of those are wrong. Lewis. Paul, he said Malik Neighbours and Chase have more than 16 receptions between them. Unfortunately for him, Malik Neighbours didn't play. Again, automatic forfeit, I'm afraid. So that's incorrect, and I think that has earned you a point. And he said that the Broncos would continue to win. Again, that's incorrect because they lost to the Chargers. I said that Trevor Lawrence would throw for 3 touchdowns. I got it wrong. He did throw for 2 touchdowns, but he also had an interception, and they just didn't do particularly well. And I said that Jaden Daniels would finish as the overall QB1. A different rookie actually finishes the overall QB1, but I would never have predicted it. It was Caleb Williams. Jaden Daniels finished as the QB8 on the week. So, like I said, the boys are away. So this is where I get to play. So already I've given Paul a point because he picked a player that was not playing. You know, we have said that to each other in past weeks. So I think that's only fair. Now, I'm also going to give Lewis a point because although we were all incorrect, I feel that mine were closer than everyone else's. And also they didn't turn up for the show. So I do feel that that deserves a point. So I'm giving Lewis and Paul both points for not turning up for the show via their wildcard picks. I think that's very fair, to be honest. And I know they're going to try and argue with me next week, but I don't think they've got a leg to stand with because they've abandoned me. So if you want to not get points, boys, then you need to turn up for the show. Now, I know that they're going to try to get their own back with me because in November, unfortunately, I'm having to go to America. Well, unfortunately for everyone else, not for me, for the whole month. So I won't be here for the month. So I suspect they'll try and plague me with points just for not turning up. So likely I will lose, but hey, I feel like I'm going to get my own back here by giving the guys points for leaving me on my own. So what have we picked for this week's wildcards? So Lewis this week has chosen the Jags to lose by 2 touchdowns and Drake May to finish as a top 8 quarterback. I think all of those are perfectly viable options. We saw how bad things were for the Jags this week. I think they're in a big slump. I think Doug Peterson is kind of fed up with the team and I just don't think he's inspiring them to want to play any better. And I think they're in kind of a spiral of failure right now. So I could see that happening. And obviously Drake May really starting to get his confidence. The thing that worries me is that offensive line. Can they hold up? But the Jags D isn't that scary. So although Josh Hines-Allen is a pretty formidable guy, so we'll see how things go and whether Drake May can cope with that. Paul said that the tight end position lives, although really doesn't feel like that at the minute. He's saying that George Kittle, Sam Laporta, Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce all finished the week in the top 12 tight ends. I mean, I think this is fun, but I also think you just have to get on the field in your top 12 tight ends. So it'd be interesting to see. I think for me, what would make it more fun is if we said they all scored a touchdown. But anyway, that's Paul's thoughts. I won't be overly surprised if they're all finished in the top 12. As I say, all you have to do is look at the field at the minute and you're a top 12 tight end. So I've gone back. Obviously, we've got another London game this week, the last of the London games hosted at Wembley this time. So I've gone with a London theme again for my first one. And I'm going to say, similar to Lewis, that the Pats beat the Jags. And I think ultimately at this point, as Paul thought a few weeks ago, I think Doug Peterson is going to get fired after this. I just don't see how he can come back from that. So I'm going to bring this back for Paul. And then we've got the Eagles playing the Giants in a divisional game. I think Malik Neighbours is going to be back this week. So I'm kind of playing with fire a little bit because if he isn't, then I'm going to get the point. But it's been 2 weeks now. He went to a concert despite being in concussion protocol that was a little bit wild and I think controversial, but I think he's making his way back now. I think he should be back this week, and I think he's going to finish with more receptions than both AJ Brown and Devonta Smith combined. I think it's not, although not probable, I think it certainly is possible. So I'm sorry everybody, it was a solo show this week, not quite as fun and banterous, but full of hopefully short sharp nuggets to help you guys out moving forward. This brings me to the end of the show. As always, thank you all for tuning in. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. I know my monotone voice isn't as fun as Paul's laugh or Lewis's great takes, but hey, here we are. Hopefully everyone will be back together next week. Obviously, you know where to find us on X at Wildcard Rewind. We always welcome your comments and your DMs. And also you can find us on YouTube. If you want to look at our scary faces, then you can search for the at Fancy Wildcard on YouTube. Don't forget to give us a subscribe. And it's not just the rewind on the channel. Obviously, we've got the Dynasty, we've got the Devi, and we've got the DFS shows. So don't forget to go and check all those out, all in full swing at the moment. Obviously, a fancy game day focus for the DFS show. So anybody in the UK playing DFS, don't forget to head over to that because it's really going to help you cash in. Otherwise, that's me over and out, and we will see you next week.